It is 7 o'clock, which means you're watching The Only Breakfast Show, live from Westminster. New measures to try to stamp out the coronavirus variants. But how and when will the impact be felt in our everyday lives? We'll be getting the latest from the Environment Secretary, George Eustice. He's on the show in just a couple of minutes. Also coming up, boots on the ground. We meet the football coach, honoured by the FA for his mission to help youngsters from deprived backgrounds. Also coming up,
thank you everyone who's donated and all your kind messages has really kept me going.
Love this. Inspired by Captain Tom, I'm going to be speaking to the 11-year-old double amputee walking a second marathon in honour of our hero. It is Tuesday, the 9th of February. Manchester mass testing and more traveller checks. The new measures outlined to fight the viral variants in the UK. Poverty warning for hundreds of thousands as MPs push for the weekly £20 universal credit increase to be extended for a year.
For me and my family to have that removed, our anxieties are going to be through the roof because it will be a question between fuel and food.
Searching for the truth. We'll be live in Wuhan as the World Health Organization prepares to reveal the results of its investigation into the original outbreak. Clearing the streets, we report from Haiti as police and protesters clash in calls for resignation of the president.
Minus 14 Celsius in the Highlands last night, and it'll be even colder tonight and tomorrow night in the north, potentially as low as minus 20. There'll be snow showers too. More details on those and the warnings before past.
Morning all. Finding new ways to fight the viral variants in the UK. Mass testing is to be introduced in parts of Manchester after cases of a new mutation of the Kent variant were confirmed. And there are new rules coming in at the borders as well. Let's take a closer look. Extra COVID tests for anyone arriving in the UK are expected to be announced later. Passengers, well, they're going to have to take 2 tests whilst in isolation on day 2 and day 8 after they arrive. In Manchester, coronavirus surge testing is to be rolled out in parts of the community after 4 cases of a new mutation of the Kent variant of COVID were found. Still, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jonathan Van Tam, has moved to ease fears over that South African COVID-19 variant. He says the mutation is unlikely to become the dominant one in the UK. While the £20 weekly increase to universal credit should be extended for 1 year to prevent hundreds of thousands of people, including children, from falling into poverty. That, according to a warning from a group of MPs. Sky's Milena Veselinovic has the detail.
For Anthony Lyman, providing for his young daughter is tinged with worry. He's been declared bankrupt and relies on the £20 weekly boost to universal credit to pay for food and bills. But the uplift introduced at the beginning of the pandemic is set to end in April, leaving Anthony worried about how he will cope.
For me and my family to have that removed, our anxieties are going to be through the roof because it will be a question between fuel and food or clothes and food. You know, it's something which will make a massive, massive impact. Yeah, so it makes us quite anxious.
MPs on the Work and Pensions Committee have called for the boost to be extended for at least a year, writing in a report that removing it now would plunge hundreds of thousands of households, including children, into poverty. For the millions already living in poverty, it would drag them down into destitution. Charities say the extra money helps the poorest in society.
For a lot of these families, they just about make ends meet, and so £20 a week might not sound like much, but actually that enables them to keep the lights on and put food on the table quite literally. Of our clients that are about to lose out on this uplift, 90% of them live in the poorest 10% of households in the UK. That's the profile of people that we're talking about that are affected by this. And so actually these households, don't have a lot of other resources.
A government spokesman said they were committed to supporting the lowest paid families through the pandemic. For people like Anthony, keeping that commitment will make all the difference. Milena Veselinovic, Sky News.
Well, a year after the first deaths from COVID-19 were confirmed in China, Sky News is hosting a series of special programmes to assess the UK's response to the pandemic and any lessons learned. It all starts tonight. My pal Sophie Ridge is going to be your host.
1 year ago this week, a new disease was officially named. COVID-19 has gone on to dominate all our lives. Our work, our friendships, our health, our homes, even our futures. Everything has changed. It's been a year of tragedy for many and frustration for most, but also a time of remarkable advances in science, technology and healthcare. Sky News has put together a comprehensive timeline of every significant moment in an unprecedented year to help us understand what we've got right and what we may still be getting wrong. Over the next 3 nights, we'll be assessing the UK response to the pandemic with some of the people behind that response and others who've been affected by it. Join us, the COVID crisis, learning the lessons, at 8 p.m. tonight, Wednesday and Thursday, here on Sky News.
And so, for the next 3 nights, we'll be asking whether we have learned any lessons from coronavirus and discussing how the country has responded to the outbreak. You can check out the documents we've published on the Sky News mobile app and go through the details yourselves of the events of the last year. That's COVID crisis, learning the lessons, beginning tonight, 8 p.m. here on Sky News. Very pleased to say that the Environment Secretary, George Eustice, joins us on the programme. Mr Eustice, great to have you on, and thank you so much for braving the cold. I know exactly how cold it is just outside the office this morning, so let's get rattling on. As you've just heard, we are running a series of special programmes at this juncture in our response to COVID-19 to assess where things have gone wrong and perhaps some of the lessons learned. I wonder if you might identify one area in which we have, as a country, changed our response, one mistake that we made and have learnt from.
Well, look, it's been an emerging situation and evidence has developed as time's gone on. And of course, we've changed our approach in some areas. So initially, the advice was that there wasn't a great deal of value in wearing face masks. As the evidence emerged, the World Health Organization changed that view and we changed our advice in line with that. So, yes, this has been a dynamic, evolving situation. The government's responded to that and changed its position in some areas, for instance, face masks.
I wonder then if we might dwell just briefly, it is away from your brief, but on universal credit then. There is a real pressure from recipients of the £20 uplift to politicians on your side of the chamber of the House of Commons. Is there any possibility that, in the immediate future, we might get a decision as to whether or not that £20 uplift might last substantially longer, perhaps as long as a year?
Well, look, obviously it's got a few more months to run, I think, a couple more months to run. And Rishi Sunak, I'm sure, when he does his budget, will be looking at all of these issues carefully. We do know that, it's affected household incomes and the resilience of households, this lockdown and the pandemic generally. We know, and we've put in place measures to help some of the most vulnerable afford food, because there's been some issues with families unable to afford food. We've put new measures in to support them, and we've had this temporary uplift in the universal credit. At some point, we need to get back to normal, get people back working again, earning full salaries again. That's got to be the route to recovery. But I'm sure that as we emerge from the lockdown, Rishi Sunak will be looking carefully at the types of measures that will be needed to make that transition from lockdown back to life as normal.
Well, let's talk about the variants that are currently in the country at the moment. And clearly, there has been a degree of concern about the South African variant, particularly because of fears around the efficacy of various vaccines. I wonder if you might kind of reiterate the points made by Jonathan Van Tam at yesterday's news conference, that, look, we have to be mindful, we have to be concerned about these new variants, but the one which we are dealing with in the United Kingdom, well, the vaccines do pretty well with that.
Yes, and that remains our main challenge at the moment, is dealing with the so-called Kent variant, which is highly infectious, spreads more quickly than some of the other variants, and dominates at the moment and is our primary challenge. And the vaccines are fully efficacious against that particular strain. We constantly monitor other variants around the world. There is always a risk that there will be a variant that manages to circumvent the vaccines that we have. That's why we have to constantly redouble our efforts efforts to evolve the vaccine so that they can deal with any new variants that might arrive, but also why we are constantly looking and toughening our approach to quarantine for those arriving from overseas, because until we have an ability to vary the vaccine and update the vaccine to meet those new challenges, we do have to exercise some caution about international travel, and that's why we've put in place the measures we have.
Sure, but just in terms of the South African variant, the cases number less than a couple of hundred at the moment, according to Jonathan Van Tam. But given that there is an 8-day process for us to be able to sequence an individual case and discover whether it's the South African variant, given the fact that we understand that community transmission has taken place, it is by no means beyond possibility that we could see a surge in the South African variant, isn't it?
Well, we can't be complacent, but I think what Professor Van Tam said yesterday is that the evidence so far suggests that the South African variant is actually less contagious than the Kent one, so it travels at a lower speed. It hasn't got that highly infectious rate that we see in the Kent variant. It's here in very small numbers now, so we have to obviously monitor it very closely. But it's also the case that while there had been concerns that some of the vaccines, the AstraZeneca vaccine, might not be fully effective against the South African variant, those concerns have also receded somewhat in that, the evidence seems to say that it prevents some of the most serious symptoms of the virus and therefore does provide some protection.
Once again, Minister, I appear to be learning from the papers that we're going to be seeing some toughening up around our borders, and you alluded to it a second ago. Is it the case that we are now going to see people who arrive here in the United Kingdom mandatory testing day 2, day 8 after their arrival?
Well, look, I don't think a final decision has been made on that, but we do keep all of this under review. We've stopped short of having a sort of total closure of the border at this stage. We actually think that it causes a lot of disruption but doesn't add a huge amount, whereas the measures we have put in place already, we require a pre-travel test and the carriers are required to check that test before passengers board. We require everybody to quarantine for a period when they arrive here. And as you know, we've introduced new measures to ensure that those coming from high-risk countries will quarantine in hotels in future. There is a case for doing some testing during quarantine. We already have a provision so that they can test to release from quarantine earlier. And we're obviously looking at this to see whether we can strengthen these measures further.
If a decision has not yet been made, why once again am I learning about something in the newspapers? Why once again has briefing been made, presumably by someone relatively senior in the civil service or relatively senior in government, and the papers are once again speculating about it?
Well, look, as you know, Neil, I was once a press secretary, and we often end up reading things in the papers that we would prefer not to. The reason I can only presume that it has appeared in the papers is that it is a subject that's being discussed at the moment within government. I don't think a final decision's been made, but I understand, Matt Hancock may be looking at this further today, and obviously, if a decision is made, then he'll make an announcement at that point. But for now, we've got in place the measures we have. We're constantly looking at refining things. We don't rule out things like post-quarantine or during quarantine testing. We already have it for people to release from quarantine early. But I don't want to prejudge anything Matt Hancock might say.
Sure, but on another and particularly related topic, quarantine hotels, we did have the announcement that those would be introduced at some point. We had an announcement that there would be an announcement. We still do not yet know when that announcement is going to be. What we do learn from the papers this morning is that perhaps one of the reasons why we haven't been able to move forward with that is that the government hasn't been able to book a hotel room.
Well, look, I know that the Department for Health are working on this, working with some of the hotel operators. They're in discussion about procuring those hotel rooms. We've got a policy in place that from the 15th of February, that's next Monday, people coming from those high-risk countries will have to quarantine in hotels. I'm confident that we will have that provision in place, and I'm aware that discussions are ongoing at the moment.
Have we booked any hotels, though? Because the strong implication, and well, indeed, the story in the papers this morning is that we haven't booked them. We haven't booked any.
Well, my understanding is, and this is obviously a procurement issue that officials in the Department of Health are dealing with, my understanding is that they are in discussion with operators. Those discussions have not yet concluded, but they're confident that they will conclude in good time for the quarantine policy to start on the 15th of February as planned.
Can I just talk briefly about vaccine passports? We heard from Nadeem Zahawi that vaccine passports is not something that the government is going to be doing. I just wonder what the government's position is on companies, private, publicly traded companies, insisting on people who access their services demonstrating that they have had a vaccine. Let's say restaurants, let's say pubs. What would be the government's position on that?
Well, I think it'll hopefully be unnecessary in the sense that within the next week or so, we hope to have vaccinated all of the most vulnerable cohorts. All of the over 70s were already well on the way there, with I think over 90% of the over 75s now vaccinated. And the reality is that as we start to emerge from lockdown, when that moment comes, and the Prime Minister will be outlining that journey on the 22nd of February, by the time we start to loosen that lockdown, then we will have vaccinated all of those most vulnerable cohorts, and therefore the risk recedes, and it probably wouldn't be worth a while of any individual business trying to check whether people have been vaccinated. So our approach to vaccination is to vaccinate the most vulnerable cohorts in order and to roll out the vaccine as quickly as possible. I very much doubt that it'll be worth anybody's while checking whether someone's been vaccinated simply because so many of the most vulnerable will have been by the time we get to easing lockdown.
Sure. What then of within the health service itself? The Royal College of Nursing has released data that says that 15% of nurses remain unvaccinated, and that is for a variety of reasons. But of those who remain unvaccinated, of those nurses that they polled, 4% had decided not to take the vaccine. Can we conceive of circumstances in which we would not insist on frontline healthcare professionals having the vaccine if they had been offered it?
Well, look, I think it's always very difficult to require or mandate vaccination in that way. It's always been the case that people have to choose to want it. Obviously, it's disappointing if there's people in, working in our NHS who themselves in very small numbers have decided not to have the vaccine. We want to get maximum protection, particularly for those vulnerable cohorts, but also for those, such as those working in the NHS, who are particularly exposed, and the vast majority of them have taken up the vaccine.
Mr. Eustice, thanks once again for joining us in the programme. Get inside and get yourself warm just as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Let's bring in Kate McCann, who was listening to our conversation with George Eustice. And look, it does rather feel that we are on the cusp of getting quite a bit of new information about what's going to be happening at the borders.
I think we will, but I think what we also got there was the confirmation that the government now feels the time is right to do that, because George Eustice was saying that the concern around new variants does mean that there need to be tougher measures. Now, although he wouldn't confirm what is in the papers and what we're reporting today, that there will be testing on day 2 and day 8 of self-isolation, that's for people not in those quarantine hotels. That's a pretty certain policy measure, and there will be others that Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, will likely announce, if not today, then in the coming days. But there were a couple of moments there that I thought were fascinating. You asked him about, why haven't you booked any hotels yet? And he said discussions are ongoing. This policy comes into force from Monday. Yeah. At the moment, we don't know exactly how it's going to work. We don't know how much it's going to cost. We don't know which hotels are going to be involved. And there are some real concerns about the ability of hotels to be able to provide this service on such short notice, even though it's important to say people shouldn't be travelling right now and the number of people coming into the country is relatively small. One final note, though, I think George Eustice gave us a hint about how we could potentially get out of tougher quarantine measures, because he said until the vaccine can be tweaked reliably to cope with any new variants, then there do need to be tougher measures at the borders. And that gives you a sense of the timescale we're looking at here. We know that there could be a new tweak in the autumn, particularly for the South African variant. But if that's when we start to see some of those measures put in place, then that might be when the government starts to lessen some of those restrictions.
Kate, much more from you throughout the day. For now, thanks very much indeed. But still to come for you on the programme, a month after Brexit, how is the fishing industry coping with new trading rules? I'm going to be live with Cornish fisherman Chris Vinicombe at 8:20. The NHS says it's worried about falling numbers of people from black, Asian and ethnic minority groups going for vaccine appointments. Scotland's first black professor at the Life Sciences, Sir Jeff Palmer, is with us at 8:30. The football coach Dan Weston has been honoured for his work to redistribute boots to the most disadvantaged children. He's the winner of a National Football Award, and we're going to be talking to him at 9:45. Experts from the World Health Organization will reveal details about their investigation into the origins of coronavirus. The team have just concluded a visit to Wuhan province in China, where the outbreak was first identified. Our Asia correspondent Tom Cheshire is there.
The WHO have been here in Wuhan for 4 weeks now, 2 of that in a very strict hotel quarantine while they're still working. And then for the last 2 weeks, they've moved to this hotel and they've been out and about in Wuhan itself, seeing some of the key sites, including the Huanan seafood market, where the first cluster of COVID-19 cases was discovered. Also hospitals, speaking to medics there, and the Wuhan Institute of Virology, where some allege that the virus might have escaped, although researchers there strongly deny that. All through that time, it's been a very strictly controlled trip. It's been very hard for journalists to get anywhere close, really, to the WHO team. We have spoken to members of that team on an individual basis who have given us interviews, but in terms of access, it has been very tightly controlled. That will change today. They're going to give their press conference. They're going to present a report as a result of what they've been doing over the last 4 weeks. They're going to give their evidence, and then they will be taking questions from the press. Now, they have warned this is unlikely to reveal the exact origins of COVID-19. We're not going to know the mechanism or the exact location. What they're hoping to do is know where to look next, really know the best avenues for further research. They've warned it could take years before we know where COVID-19 came from. I think the 3 theories really that most people are interested in at this point are the idea that perhaps it did leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. We'll hear about that. What Chinese officials have been saying could have happened is imported into China through cold food imports. They say this is a phenomenon with COVID-19. They say it's how the pandemic might have started. And then there's the last theory, really. There's one that most virologists believe, that this started in the animal population, perhaps in bats somewhere in southern China or Southeast Asia, and made its way to humans. So we'll hear a bit more about those theories when that press conference starts.
Some of the days on the news now, and Donald Trump's lawyers have again denied he encouraged his supporters to storm Congress during that violent protest in Washington, D.C. last month. The former president is due to face a second impeachment trial in the Senate, although he is not going to be giving evidence. A huge rescue operation is continuing in India after at least 26 people were killed when a glacier collapsed and created a huge torrent of water and mud. Amongst the missing are 37 power plant workers thought to be trapped in a tunnel. Figures out today suggest that around 600,000 cases of coronavirus may have been prevented by the NHS COVID-19 Test and Trace app. The system uses Bluetooth to keep an anonymous record of when people come into close contact with each other. The data also suggests around 2 million people across England and Wales have now been advised to self-isolate by the app. Investigators have revealed that a hacker in Florida gained access to a city's water treatment plant. The attacker attempted to increase the amount of sodium hydroxide in the water, but was stopped when a member of staff intervened. Sodium hydroxide is used to treat water acidity, but can, in large quantities, cause burns. After decades of instability, Haiti is descending once more into virtual civil war. The president is refusing to stand down at the end of his 5-year term, claiming he is still entitled to another year in office. Well, it's prompted violent clashes between the security services and protesters in Haiti's capital. Sky's chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey has this report.
Billowing clouds of tear gas fill the streets across the capital. Anti-government protesters chased down and smoked out by the police. Every age group is involved in this street battle. The stinging gas can't be avoided. This was a day promising revolution against President Moise. It was consistently and indiscriminately stamped out. Drive-by shootings by the police continues. This is where protest marches usually form up. They try setting fires and building barricades. But the security forces were having none of it. Police units moved into the crowds, firing continuously, tear gas rounds, handguns and rifles.
Police are firing with weapons now. People are running away, and there's a lot of gas. But also, there's bullets being fired. They're trying to clear the street, and it's working. They're right around the corner from us. These guys keep throwing stones. Danny?
The people say the president has failed to do anything, has overseen mass corruption, but worst of all, has allowed kidnapping for ransom to grow into the country's biggest growth business. Communities are terrorized by kidnap gangs. Now they barricade themselves in. Protecting themselves with machetes. The rich and the poorest are all targets for the kidnapping, and they blame the president.
What happens if he doesn't leave?
A disorganized political opposition say they will continue their moves to oust the president. But each day this country, already one of the poorest in the world, is sliding into absolute anarchy. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Haiti.
Time now to see how the weather is looking today. I think you might have an idea. Isabel has the details, and I think we've got a lowest temperature recorded somewhere, Isabel.
Minus 15.1 out Nahara in Highland. My goodness, coldest of the winter. And it looks as though, Neil, it'll be even colder tonight and tomorrow night. It could well get as low as minus 20. Not a record, but my word, exceptional. And we've got warnings out. The easterly wind bringing further snow showers. An amber warning in force for central and eastern Scotland. Let's take a look at the detail.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather. Sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The amber warning in force across central and eastern Scotland until 9 p.m. this evening. 10 to 15 centimetres, potentially 20 centimetres more snow expected there, and blowing around with that east wind too. There'll be bands of snow showers coming in other areas, as far as Dublin actually seeing some snow this morning. But there's some very heavy snow coming through the Wash down into the North Midlands at the moment, and there'll be more snow showers across eastern areas, as you can see, some of them getting further west, but brighter skies for the west generally. Most cloudy, most snowy in eastern areas, where it'll still feel very cold. And after that widespread sharp frost this morning, temperatures barely above freezing, still that wind chill, and particularly cold in the wind across the south, where it'll be really gusty and lively, those winds through the course of the day. Now, as we head through this evening and tonight, the winds do ease a touch, particularly across the north, where, as I said, very low temperatures there, a widespread frost elsewhere, with snow probably continuing down the eastern side of the country tonight. And during the day tomorrow, still further snow showers, mainly, I think, for northeast England and around the coast of East Anglia. Further west and north, clearer and sunnier, and with lighter winds, it does mean an exceptionally cold night Wednesday night.
Well, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, is expected to announce that travellers arriving in the UK will have to undergo extra COVID tests. Passengers are said to have to take 2 tests whilst in isolation on day 2 and day 8 after they arrive. Speaking to us earlier, the Environment Secretary, Eustice, said the challenge was to find the most effective way of stopping new cases of COVID-19 coming into the country.
I don't think a final decision has been made on that, but we do keep all of this under review. We've stopped short of having a sort of total closure of the border at this stage. We actually think that it causes a lot of disruption but doesn't add a huge amount. There is a case for doing some testing during quarantine. We already have a provision so that they can test to release from quarantine earlier, and we're obviously looking at this to see whether we can strengthen these measures further.
Well, let's take you back to universal credit and the calls to extend the weekly £20 extra for a year. Let's speak now to Rebecca. Now, she's a single mum with one daughter. She herself is currently on universal credit. Rebecca, great to have you on this morning, and thanks for speaking to us about this. Just give us a little idea of the situation that you're in at the moment and how important, how significant that extra 20 quid has been to you.
Well, so like you say, I'm a single parent on universal credit. I'm also working, so I'm doing my best, but still I'm barely paying for the essentials, barely managing to pay for food, heating, bills and everything. So that £80 a month is a huge contribution that basically makes sure that we have food on our table. And if you consider removing that when resources are already tight, during a pandemic, during everything that's happening, and winter, it's obviously making me very, very nervous and scared, the idea of losing that £80.
Am I right in saying that you're also studying part-time as well, Rebecca? So you've got studying, you've got the study. Sorry, on you go.
Oh no, sorry for interrupting. Yes, I've just gone back to university at the Open University to try and better my situation. So doing everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So just you've got childcare presumably that you've got to be worried about. You've got studies that you've started with. You're trying to work. I mean, if the universal, there is still some time to run on the additional £20. But if it comes to an end in the not-too-distant future, where do you think you will most feel the pinch? What will have to go when that £80 does go?
I guess it's all the sort of luxuries. So, for example, my daughter loves singing, so I spend £10 a fortnight on singing lessons for her. It's trying to, we'll have to try and find some way to get her clothes when she runs out of clothes. I don't know how, but we will. And, often something that happens is that I fall behind in rent, because that's something that you can cut back on for a month and then make the money back up again by paying a little bit extra. So it's very, it's everything is so tight. I budget to the penny so that when something like this happens, there's not much wriggle room. There's not much space for, anything.
Yeah, and of course, our energy bills, I don't know what the temperature is like with you this morning, but it is fairly freezing just outside our front door. Your energy costs are going to be significantly higher, at least for the next few days.
Yeah. Absolutely. Plus, we're on lockdown, so I don't have the luxury of just turning the heater off and I'm just cold all the time, which is what I used to do, because I can't do that to my daughter. So I keep the heating on all the time and, the lights on, and it's like the Alps outside, it's real, it's real cold. So that's obviously a real big concern. And it's difficult now, but I worry most about next winter, because I won't have any savings or anything. So if we lost that £80, I genuinely am worried about how we'd get through next winter, let alone this winter.
And how's your wee one doing? How's your daughter coping? Because of course there's going to be, I presume, a degree of being taught from home by mum, isn't there?
Yeah. I'm lucky that she's a resilient, joyful little creature. She's the greatest little kid in the world. But she's struggling. And she also, now that she's 8, she understands a sort of concept of poverty. So she knows that we don't have very much, and she knows that things cost money, and so I think I try to take the worries away from her as much as possible and give her everything, but she's starting to see for herself that things can be a struggle and that there's a discrepancy in society between those who have and those who have not, which is horrible. That shouldn't be the case,
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us this morning. I hope you and the wee one do stay nice and warm.
Thank you, and I hope you have a lovely day.
Also this morning, Labour is calling for an extension to the support given to businesses during the pandemic. They say many firms are facing a funding bombshell in the coming months. Lucy Powell, the Shadow Business Secretary, joins us on the programme. Ms Powell, great to have you on. I'll talk about that in just a second, but I wonder if we might just get comment from you on that which you have heard. There is certainly a degree of pressure building up on the Chancellor, on the government to continue with that £20 uplift. Does Labour have an end date for when that £20 uplift should come to an end?
Well, I mean, the government are going to need to look at this in the long term, aren't they? But we certainly think that for the next year, for while people are dealing with the pandemic, that is absolutely critical. But I thought your interview there with Rebecca really spoke volumes about what that means to her, how it is really the difference between being able to sort of feed her child or not, and what a lovely interview and lovely family they are, and how desperate they are really, and that's why it's so important that we look to extend it. But it's also about it doesn't actually make economic sense to cut that at the moment either. I think that's the other point that we would want to make, because that's taking money out of the economy. It's taking money away from people being able to spend in their local shops and their local high streets. And that's going to be the wrong timing as well if that happens in April, just as shops and that sort of start to reopen.
Yeah, I think it behoves all of us who are not lucky enough to be in Rebecca's position to remind ourselves there are people out there for whom £20 it makes a huge difference. But let's go on to what Labour is discussing today, this £50 billion bombshell awaiting businesses come April. What's that then?
So, unfortunately, we've got this massive sort of bombshell of all of these cliff edges coming around all at the same danger point at the beginning of April. Businesses have deferred their VAT payments for last year. That's about £34 billion that they're going to have to start repaying from the beginning of April. The business rate holiday is due to come to an end, so businesses are going to have to start paying business rates at the beginning of April. That's nearly 10 billion. And then, of course, the furlough scheme is coming to an end, as well as other loans that businesses will have taken out will have to start being repaid at that point. And unless this is addressed urgently by the government, it can't wait till the budget now. Unless it's addressed, this bombshell is going to blow a big hole in our economy, and it's going to. I'm really worried it's going to lead to tens of thousands of businesses going bust. And in fact, the Federation of Small Businesses have warned that 250,000 businesses are at risk of going bust in the next few months. So that's why we want to see the government extend the business rate holiday for at least 6 months. We want them to extend the furlough scheme for while public health restrictions are in place, and we want them to continue the cut in VAT for hospitality, which is one of the hard-pressed sectors. Because, of course, many of these businesses don't even know if they can reopen in April yet, let alone start to pay these bills.
Sure, and I'm not doubting your sincerity in all of this, but isn't this just a really easy political hit for the Labour Party? You and I both know that at some point these schemes will not just have to come to an end, but they will have to be paid for. It will be a difficult political decision whenever that takes place. And frankly, a year, 2 years from now, one imagines that businesses will still be feeling the effects of COVID-19. I mean, isn't the case that, these schemes will have to end at some point, and perhaps it's better to bite the bullet now, take the financial hit and rebuild rather than storing it up for, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years down the line?
Well, it's not an easy decision to call for these things to be extended at all. And look, there's two reasons for why we think these things need to be extended. Firstly, we can't afford not to do it, because the cost to the economy, the cost to the exchequer and the public purse of tens of thousands of businesses going bust and all those jobs being lost will cost our economy a great deal more in the long run, because the recovery will be choked off because there won't be businesses there to power it. There'll be higher levels of unemployment, which are already very high, and that costs us as taxpayers a great deal of money in terms of benefit payments and so on. And there's lost tax revenue. So we can't afford not to do it from that point of view. And the second thing is that these economic support measures have to keep pace with public health measures. We've already supported and invested in businesses a great deal over the last year, rightly so, as we've asked them to close to keep us all safe from this pandemic. Now would be just the wrong point to pull the rug on that support, as we can see the reopening of the economy and the recovery on the horizon with the vaccination programme. So all that good money, if you like, would go to waste if we don't maintain that support through this critical period. And businesses are really worried today about how they're going to meet these huge bills that councils are sending out, the business rate bills as we speak, and businesses are really worried about how they're going to pay for that in April, especially if they're not even going to be open by then.
Ms Powell, I'm very conscious that we have to let you go, but just briefly, a word from you on that which we're expecting, once again, to hear from the government. It's trailed in the papers, but the ministers can't tell us anything about it. That people arriving here in the United Kingdom will have to have 2 COVID tests, day 2, day 8 of their isolation. Sure, that's something you'd welcome.
Well, we would welcome it, but I mean, I think the issue here is that our borders have not been secured.
From elsewhere, particularly the South African variant. So we really worried about that. And so the government said they were going to impose the hotel quarantine. That's not happened. And now we've got these other measures coming in. So they should have taken action earlier and stronger to secure our borders and stop people coming into this country without quarantining.
Lucy Powell, good to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, police have used water cannon to break up protests in several major cities in Myanmar. Some news in just the last few minutes. The authorities have extended areas where gatherings are restricted. Let's get the views of our Southeast Asia correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, joining us this morning. Good to see you, Siobhan. Well, that water cannon, for starters, a one-off yesterday, it is now a tactic. Are we to view what we're seeing today as an escalation of a crackdown?
100%. We are definitely seeing an escalation in force being used by the authorities today. We've seen water cannon being used against peaceful protesters in a number of areas, including Mandalay, which is the second biggest city, Naypyidaw, which is the capital, lining up in Yangon at the moment. No reports it's been fired so far. Bago, which is outside Yangon. Also in Naypyidaw, police fired rubber bullets into the air in order to disperse crowds there. That hasn't worked, but there are reports that several people have been injured. And also, as you say, there have been extensions of curfews, night curfews in some areas, also rules saying that people can't gather in sizes of more than 5. None of it's working. The protesters are continuing to gather, and the force of the authorities is also growing stronger.
Siobhan, many thanks. Coming up after the break, I'm going to be speaking with one adult with disabilities as she prepares to receive her coronavirus vaccine. That's next. Welcome back. There are 9 priority groups who are among the first to be offered the vaccine. High up on that list is, of course, the category so-called at-risk adults, which includes those with learning disabilities. Very pleased to say we're joined now by Lucy, who herself is in assisted living, and she is set to have the vaccine later today. And very good morning, Lucy. How are you this morning?
I actually am good.
Good, but I'm very pleased to hear it. This is a big day, isn't it? You're going to be getting the vaccine later on.
Yeah.
And how is that making you feel?
I feel a little more happy, really.
Is there any bit? Is there any bit of you, Lucy, that's maybe a little bit nervous about it all?
Well, it won't.
That's good. Well, you're a braver lady than I am, 100%. Yeah. But there must. So tell me a bit about how coronavirus has been, because it has meant that you haven't been able to see friends and family as much as possible.
It's just a bit difficult. I don't see my family a long time, and I miss my friends, and it's a bit difficult. And it's a bit tricky one.
So then, Lucy, are you looking forward then to the point when you can give? I know your nieces and nephews would be very much looking forward to seeing you when you can give everyone a big hug.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
And so.
Yeah.
Oh, no, don't you worry. I'm more nervous than you this morning. Believe you me, I'm more nervous than you. But with all the cold weather and with everyone getting the sniffles and with coronavirus, this is a good day for you, because at some point, it means that things might be coming to a little bit of an end and that things all might get a little bit easier for all of us.
Yeah. I'm very. I feel a bit more confident myself, really, and I'm very more after myself and more.
Well, do you know what? That is really good to hear, because you're competing with me for confidence this morning. You're on telly all around the world at the moment, so you should be very pleased with yourself. So go on, tell me, what's the one thing, Lucy, that you're looking forward to doing more than anything else that you haven't been able to recently?
Because I'm a bit, it's not easy.
Don't you worry. Don't you worry, Lucy. Look, it's a big day ahead of you, but it's all safe and sound. You're going to get the vaccine, and fingers crossed, everything's going to be a lot better in the not too distant future. You heard it here first, okay? Lucy?
Okay.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to us this morning. I hope it's a good day.